Yeah, I've been going through my experiences of a series of 8 pilgrimages to Israel with the Channel for the Way of Mastery, JM, and many friends of the heart, they're known as. Hundreds of different people who've come along on these trips. And one thing that everybody, or many of the people, have in common is that they've been called to, and often despite their more traditional upbringing and living as lawyers or doctors or social workers or whatever it is that they might be doing, being called to these teachings, often in spite of the fact that they're channelings, but because of the beauty and the power and the truth that they find in the teachings of the Way of Mastery. I had in the 90s, the mid-90s through about mid-2000s, a series of 9 sessions with the channel directly where Joshua would come through and I would be able to ask him questions directly. And, my nature is to be incredibly skeptical about these types of things, and nevertheless, here I am. But I remember in one of the channelings, I thought I'd go in and test Joshua a bit to see if he was, if he could pull something out of a hat, kind of. And so I asked him, if you're so all-knowing and so on, what's my middle name? It's a reasonable question to ask, I suppose, or maybe not. And he gave an answer sort of about the character of my nature. He said that, well, beloved friend, your middle name is compassion. And I thought, And he said, what better to be given, the name that God gave you or the name that the world gave you? And I thought, yeah, okay, that's a nice answer in its own way, but it didn't really, pull the rabbit out of the hat and be able to massive psychic display pull my middle name out of a hat. So I'd had that memory of that event, and that doesn't do anything to decrease my skepticism, really. But on another sense, I've learned about channeling. Channeling isn't really about somebody being able to prick the top 50 batting averages in the American League and tell you exactly what they are and who they are. Nobody can do that. Nobody, I don't think anybody's ever been able to do that, just without seeing it. But there are different levels of accessing information and really verifying information. Joshua said in the channelings to me at one point, what I'm doing is really coming to give my authority, my voice, to confirming things that you're discovering on your own. And that's very much how I've seen the channeling experience. So we're on Israel Pilgrimage 4, which started in Egypt. And I just would say that for any of these trips, I'm basically telling one story from the trips. We did a week in Egypt, and then, I don't know how long it was, 10 days or something in Israel as well. I could have any number of stories, 5 or 10 or whatever, additional to the ones I'm telling here for each trip. And then there were 40 people on each trip, and they all have their own stories, probably all of whom have miraculous stories. Certainly, I know for a fact many of them do. So these are incredible events, these trips, and all of the miraculous things that are happening on them. I'll give a really quick example. I think it was some of it from the second trip of the type of thing I'm talking about. There was a woman who was on the trip who was talking to me because she trusted me for some other reason. We just met, though. And she said, and people have these stories about past lives, and a lot of people can see into it and feel into it. And there's something called the mystery schools, and people who've studied this know about these things. And in Egypt and other places, there are the Isis mystery schools. In the Way of Mastery tradition, it's believed Mary Magdalene is a master of the mystery schools. And the mystery schools tend to be feminine wisdom, energetic practices, and a whole sort of second, a parallel wisdom strain as to the more masculine sort of intellectual things. And so the mystery schools are talked about in people in these circles. This woman talks to me, and her story is that she was in the mystery schools way back in Egypt, or perhaps in Joshua's time, and that she didn't complete the curriculum, and so her soul is struggling with that. And I'm like, this is pretty new to me when I'm hearing this. And I'm, wanting to be nice and polite and helpful as I can. And one of the things that I'd run into just before this, again, this is new to me, these things, was I'd been told that one of the men who was on the trip had been one of Jesus's teachers, Jeshua's teachers in Egypt. So the idea is that Jeshua would have gone to the mystery schools as well and been initiated in all of their practices and become a master of them in his own right. So, okay, and this guy was said to have been one of Jeshua's teachers in Egypt, which is interesting. And I thought, well, I don't know much about this, but so I'm trying to help this woman somehow. And I said to her, well, I don't know much about this, but I heard that this fellow on the trip was one of Jeshua's teachers in Egypt in the mystery schools. And you're talking about mystery school curriculum and not finishing your mystery school curriculum. So I thought maybe he'd be a good person for you to meet. And I'm meeting her early morning at 7:00 on the way to breakfast. I think we're staying in the same place, and I don't know how we met, but she asked me to come over and talk to me about this. So we're talking about this, and then I'm going to go to breakfast. But the room that we're in, the building we're in, is quite a ways from the breakfast place. I've got to walk across 2 big grassy yards kind of to get to the breakfast place. I don't know, 300-400 feet at least. So, and it's a little remote compared to the other buildings. So she says, "Oh yeah, no, I'd really like to talk to him." And I said, "Well, go ahead." And she says, "Oh no, but I feel comfortable approaching him directly. Would you tell him that I'm interested and introduce us?" I said, "Sure, of course." So, okay, we have the conversation. This is on my way to breakfast, basically. So I go out the door, and this whole empty area, there are a couple buildings, other rooms, big buildings. There's a big complex around the Sea of Galilee, Nof Ginosar, where we stayed many years. And there's a big grassy lawn in front, and again, out of the way. And I noticed that the man that we've been discussing is sitting in the middle of the lawn, just, lotus style or whatever, cross-legged. And I'm going, I won't say his name because I haven't asked permission, but I'm going, "So-and-so, oh my God, you're just the guy I want to see. I was just talking about you." And he goes, "Oh, well, that was quick. Spirit told me to walk over here and sit here and that a message would be coming to me." So I convey the message and we go to breakfast together. But that's the type of thing that there are days when that happens seemingly, or not just seemingly, like minute by minute, all day. You sit down and you talk to somebody, then they need to know something and they need to know something, and it all works like this, like it's all being orchestrated from someplace above. And there's this wow factor, but then you think, oh no, forget the wow factor, let's just get on with the work. He needs to know that she needs to connect with him, and that probably has something to do with something that needs to be done later on the trip, and that's the way these things go. I've never seen anything like this. It's amazing, the experiences. And we had somebody come on a trip, I forget which one it was, but it was fairly late. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, say 5 years ago. Guy came on a trip, first one he was on, and at the end of the trip, and he's a professional guy, at the end of the trip he goes, "Oh my God, the level of synchronicities on these trips is comic, humorous, comic. They're so outrageous." And so that's not just my perception, that's perception of many, many people who've been on these pilgrimages. So something I shared as well, and it might take the rest of this video and the next video too to tell this, we'll see, was that part of my journey involves going into deep rings of fear. And following the 4th pilgrimage in 2007, prior to the next pilgrimage in 2008, I had a profound ring of fear, one of the greatest in my life, and really almost to match the level of fear that occurred when I had my fall at 16. And this is how that happened. I'm living in a house, and I'd gotten to the point in my journey where I was kind of thinking, well, it seemed like everywhere I lived was relevant to my spiritual journey somehow. So I was just living in this question, how is living in this house relevant to my spiritual journey? I was living there with my wife and a young son. So my son was old enough to start considering having a cell phone. So I thought, well, cell phone. I know there's lots of social questions as to whether it's healthy or not. And, when we have to, as parents, you have to think, when are you going to give a kid a cell phone? And I thought, well, I'll just do a little research on it. I mean, I am, obviously assume they're okay. I mean, or 2 billion people wouldn't have them or whatever. So I do a little research. And while I'm researching it, I see these studies which say that anyone living within a quarter of a mile of a cellular tower, the broadcast towers, that there are health problems, increased cancer risks in 2 studies. One study in a place called Netanya in Israel, and another study in a town in Germany that I don't remember right now. I should do my homework before I start these things. But 2 major studies in which there are marked cancer increases. Now, I will say, in hindsight, I honestly don't know whether this is accurate or not. There are lots of other studies. This is a hugely controversial subject as to whether these things are emitting harmful radiation or not. The towers and the phones and other things. This is all new to me. And I think, well, I'm glad we don't live near a cell tower, at least. And then I look up cell tower locations, and particularly things called base stations, which are the bigger broadcast stations. And we live within 900 feet of one. It's right out the window. That's that big tower over there. And I go into this white fear terror, because when I start reading about the symptoms that people have, I realize I've had them since I moved into that house. Ringing in the ears all the time, fatigue, other things. And some of the symptoms, yes, some of the symptoms, no, but I start going into this intense terror. And it was a house that we'd had a special deal on, and as an artist, I was crafting my life so that I didn't have to worry too much about rent because of this for a while, and I could focus on other things and building, putting $5,000 into frames, for example, which you need to have exhibits at times. So moving from the house would have been a major financial blow. And just this idea that, you've seen the movie Erin Brockovich, where the woman finds out that her kids are in a poisonous area, and she runs and gets them out of the pool right then, and that they've been swimming in the pool for years. Well, that's the way I felt. I felt like we were living in this house. We were being irradiated by something which was dangerous. And anyhow, this fear, you can imagine that would be a pretty intense fear. So I end up buying a radio meter to measure the radiation, and the radiation is extremely high in the yard compared to other places. And I go into tremendous fear. I asked Joshua, what's this about, right? And he says, beloved friend, this is following on this energetic event I'd had at the channeling in 2006, and also some energetic experience which has happened at Egypt in the pyramids in 2007. This is following on that. And also my work to become a channel. And Joshua says to me, beloved friend, and I'm now talking to him directly because the sessions with JM are complete. We're using this tower to open up your energetic spaces physically so that you can transmit more Christ light. And everybody else is safe, by the way, because, we're working with you, but you don't need to worry about the family. The family will be fine. And my son and wife are not showing any symptoms. But, my faith isn't great enough for that to really take care of my fear. My fear just went and kept going on, and I kept trying to negotiate with the idea of staying in the house for a lot of reasons. But I just couldn't do it, and we ended up moving at massive financial cost to another house further away. Now, this is leading up to the 5th pilgrimage. But I just want to leave this video saying that, no matter how much you've been around the work and how much it helps in difficult times, there are times when fear is overwhelming and can be overwhelming. And I was being completely overwhelmed by this fear. It was affecting every aspect of my life. And I felt the longer I stayed in that house, the sicker I was getting. And I would measure, I knew that if we sat at one, my young son, if he sat at one end of the sofa, he was in a lower radiation field than if he sat at the other. And that's a really scary place to be. And so often service requires going into depths of fear and taking things on that maybe later on it seemed like it was worthwhile and is given meaning, but in the moment, boy, it sure seems meaningless and awful. So I'm going to finish with that, and we'll go into part 2 of, it's really the transition from trip 4 to 5, but we'll call it trip 4 for now. And thank you for listening.